response to the large-scale advancements in machine technologies, architects of the early 20th century have propelled the architecture's discourse through an extremely transformative era, exploring ideas and methodologies for incorporating environmental mechanics with the existing rules of architectural construction, to accommodating their aesthetic ideals with the engineered form of building technologies, as they were perceived as cold, robust, and everything opposite to what formerly offers comfort and intimacy for a human being. In the chapter Concealed Power of his book, The Architecture of Well-Tempered Environment, Rainer Banham recognized two major streams of ideas leading towards machines' concealment, one of which can be seen most clearly in the practices of Berlin and California architects, where they incorporate the machines in accordance with the basic formal rule of construction. It was through a careful and intricate process of customization that machines were finally allowed to be exposed in a living space and physically touched by the inhabitants they are serving. In the other stream of approach, however, concealments were achieved solely by hiding mechanical objects with uniform suspended membranes, forming yet another layer of envelope that enfolds the interior volume of the building. In this case, the integration of machines had resulted in quite a divided relationship between space, structure, and machineries, which are separately manifested, serving different purposes, and are loosely attached to each other as opposed to forming a coherent architectural whole. Moving forward to present-day practices, the notion of machine concealment has since proceeded to serve as a key element in the architecture profession as it develops. Over the years, however, with the manufacturing process of architecture being increasingly industrialized, the delicate approach in pursuing personalized machines were proved to be overly cumbersome in comparison with the pre-manufactured, inexpensive, ready-to-use products. What remains to be reminiscent of that sense of craftsmanship in contemporary buildings is the customized shading device, serving not only as the responsive system for daylighting control, but also a dynamic envelope fulfilling the stylistic demand of the architects. Most contemporary architects had gravitated towards the existing formula of manifesting direct concealment, and rather than resolving the fragmented relationship between space, structure, and machineries, the majority of them moved on with reinforcing that contradiction in their own architectural practices. The concept of suspended concealment has evolved and expanded into an all-around system of interior envelope, which inherits the ability to in itself formulate a coherent spatial environment. In Zaha Hadid's design for the first floor Puerto Madrid Hotel, it breaks away from the robust construction of the building structure and instead features continuous walls, furniture, and fittings molded from solid surface material, with her signature swooping shapes creating the impression of being inside a cave. In Kengo Kuma's architectural practices, unfinished wood pieces were often delicately situated over the ceiling structures. This has helped realize the architecture's ideal of a soft and warm interior environment juxtaposed upon the steel and concrete construction and the underlying mechanical services. Meanwhile, practitioners in the industry have gradually come to appreciate the physical forms of the mechanics both for their sculptural expressiveness and for their cultural implications. The industrial style categorized this sense of aesthetic where the designer strategically removed the suspended screen within the standardized structure to expose the cluttered machines at the ceiling, which were originally meant to be conveniently concealed. However, the unveiling of the concealment still rarely happens in cases of design schemes, initiating comfort and intimacy. The inhabitable spaces of architecture are still dominantly sculpted with non-mechanical objects, with the building machines remain segregated from the inhabitants' direct contact. Banham's research on the history of machine concealment relative to the environment reflects architects' superficial understanding of architectural manifestation. Based on their persistence in maintaining the convention of architecture equals art and design follows aesthetics, machine technologies was initially introduced with the role of environmental aids into the process of building design. Undeniably, by tucking the machines under concealment, as well as coming up with service floors, the architects did facilitate an easy and universal technique for mechanical integration without giving up the traditional logic and aesthetics of architectural construction. Even as contemporary architects concede the limitations of traditional floor-ceiling construction, they still are reluctant to confront the ill-established relationship between building systems and structures. We're still now surrounded within an environment plasticized with molding materials and non-mechanical objects, where the vital technologies we need are only allowed into that sacred space in the form of furniture, taking up often an excessive amount of living space from the inhabitants. However, as we are facing the increasingly severe consequences of climate change, our society have also made a sudden arrival at a new juncture of disease in architecture. We are forced to confront the limitations of our own homes, as the static, unchangeable architectural assembly is only able to respond to the very minimal of the requirements for human comfort. Unlike textured, pristine craftiness of contemporary buildings, the space in need is primarily responsive, which each of its components more intimately acquaint with social, domestic, and infrastructural demand of the inhabitants. The traditional construction routine will no longer satisfy the excessive mechanical systems required for the living space. Instead, it requires technologies to be internalized as the structure itself to redefine the architectural construct. In that sense, there are already several architects who chose to react against the modernist aestheticization of machine technology by really utilizing the system's basic structural elements for spatial manifestation. In his take on Immu's microprocessor factory, Richard Rogers allowed both the structure and mechanical services emanate from the tall central spine, which supports 130-foot steel trusses and allows for a column-free interior. In his revolutionary project, Centre Georges Pompidou, which he designed in collaboration with Renzo Piano, the skeleton and excessive mechanics had engulfed the building from an exterior. The building system had in this sense taken over and itself become the habitable architecture. In the 1960s, Rainer Banham relentlessly reacted against the superficial obsession with the fundamentalism in architectural aestheticization. He argued in his article, "A Home is Not a House," when it contains so many services that the hardware could stand up by itself without any assistance from the house. Why have a house to hold it up? By pushing this idea forward, he really proposed the different possible paths for the future development of architecture's discourse, in the sense of breaking the constraints surrounding the role of building technologies and their integration, leading to a new vision of machine as architecture, from which architecture let loose of all of its fundamentals, and traditional architecture elements are reduced to their symbolic origins and reincarnated as functional technologies that adapt to their architectural role in convenience of their spatial and formal properties. Architecture will then go beyond its fundamental composition and become a metaphysical template of an enclosure for technologies to be plugged in as walls, columns, structural frames, and membranes. Systems will become the look, the composite, the texture of our environment. It will be the truth of our future architecture.